Thanks for joining in today. Today's webinar is about 2024 State of Website Privacy Report. We launched it a few weeks back, and we've gotten a really positive feedback from the overall privacy world. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Hey everyone, I'm Vaibhav. I also go by V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. And again, like the core context of why we kind of built this report was especially chatting with privacy professionals at different forums, IPP, we host bridge conferences as well. One of the main problems we have seen is that privacy teams often lack KPIs and metrics beyond the big headlines of fine. And we wanted to create a resource for privacy teams to take back internally with their board and say, hey, this is where website privacy sits. We are somewhere in this benchmark, and let's invest time, resources to fix and be better at privacy. Today's webinar is being recorded, and after the webinar ends, you all, whoever has attended or registered, will get a webinar recording in their email. Throughout the session, there is a Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your webinar webinar panel or Zoom webinar panel. You should be able to hit Q&A, ask questions as anonymous or yourself. Either are open. There's also a chat box. You can put anything in chat amongst each other. I'll try to monitor both of them in case there are any comments by the audience. And with that, let's start. So yeah, again, welcome everyone on today's webinar. I wanted to quickly start with the main agenda that we are going to cover today. The first thing, again, as I said, one of the main pain points we also see regularly is lack of KPIs, and the state of website privacy creates a benchmark KPIs around what are the fines, why the fines are happening, what are the non-compliance reasons from multiple jurisdictions. So for US and Europe, we do plan to extend it to other jurisdictions like China and India in the next report. From a transparency perspective, we will also mention how did we conduct the test itself. Next, there is quite a bit of difference between results from US and Europe, and they are depending on the law. Like both regions have different kind of non-compliance, so we will look at that. My favorite is benchmarking on third parties. That's a big one. A lot of risk lies in third-party data sharing. We've seen that with a bunch of fines that has happened in US and Europe over the last few months. And finally, key takeaways as you go into 2025, what can you do to actually comply? What can you do to, in fact, like all of you have put in some efforts on making your website compliant, have a privacy policy, had a cookie banner, things like that. But since websites are still falling short of from a compliance perspective, what can you do to actually fix it? So why look at websites? I think there are multiple reasons. That's the first touch point for your digital experience. Like back in the day, people would go to retail outlets and storefronts, and website is your storefront in the modern world. And I think regulators have also noticed the same thing, right? When we were looking at the data on US in terms of fines, in US, of course, we had to look at FTC, AG actions, maybe some HIPAA fines as well. We focused on the privacy fines, and actually 37 of those fines were all related to website non-compliance, right from the banner not working, GPC signal not working, pixel breaches, things like that. Especially for FTC, a lot of fines were because health companies were saying they will not share health data to pixels, and they were. So that's one kind of fine we see. Even in Europe, we looked at the top 20 largest GDPR fines, and then 6 of them were related to websites and consent specifically. So I like to think of like if we borrow from our security peers and security counterparts, they keep talking about a thing called attack surface, right? We have an attack surface that hackers can attack on, and they protect that, right? So it's all optimizing attack surface and hey, how visible this surface is, and can someone attack, right? So for example, think of a database. Is it like open to public? Yeah, then we need more protections, things like that, right? So they're thinking attack surface. That's how they work. In privacy, I like to change it and say, what's our enforcement surface? What are regulators scanning? And at least if you look at the open sweeps that regulators have done, especially in Europe, they have a European Data Protection Board tool. Had launched a tool for website evidence collection and then subsequently done cookie sweeps. Not to pick on any specific company, but the recent orange fine in Europe was exactly, I mean, there were two reasons, but there's one reason that privacy teams control, which is even after user rejected the cookies on the consent banner, cookies were still being stored or sent externally. So that's an operational issue. That's not like a legal interpretation issue, and something that we feel websites can actually fix. So yeah, coming back to, I mean, why even like think about your website privacy once you have put in your banners or your privacy policies? That's an enforcement surface. That's almost like an attack surface for security, where regulators are scanning web and app. We saw in US FTC has done this, has done a similar job. In fact, I think the goalpost has gone from website and next to mobile apps, especially with in Europe, France, CNIL has a task force or a guidance for next year where they're going to do something similar for mobile app. And I think FTC already did it with a bunch of fines. So web and app, I think, are the two entry points for consumers, and those are also the enforcement surface with regulators are scanning. Also, activists are scanning, especially in US. We've seen a lot of SEPA lawsuits, a lot of VPPA lawsuits, and all of those lawsuits are happening because of only two reasons, right? One is either the consent is not working or you end up sharing sensitive data to pixels because they do automatic data collection. So that's why kind of looking at your website as one entry point where enforcement can happen via regulators or activists is super important. Next, just getting into like some of the key findings between the two jurisdictions. When we started the report in terms of benchmarking, my hypothesis, in fact, like a lot of people in Privado, their hypothesis was we're going to have like a lot of non-compliance in US because there's no national law, there's no regulator like that. You know, the AGs are doing their job, and Europe is going to perform much, much better. Like my estimate was it's going to be something like 50%, less than 50% for Europe. We were equally surprised between the two geographies. 76% of the top 100 websites in US do not honor CPRA opt-out signal. So if a user has set a GPC signal to opt out, something on which companies have been fined, 76 out of those 100 websites are not honoring that. In Europe, on the other hand, where there is a opt-in kind of compliance requirement, 74% of websites do not honor. What was even more interesting was all these websites, there were no website where we didn't find a cookie banner, right? Where we didn't find a privacy policy. All of them had that, right? And which means as privacy teams, all of you actually spend time, energy, money of the company to make the website compliant. But what's happening is these 69 issues in US and 23 issues in kind of the Europe case, they're all happening because of misconfigurations. They're happening because for privacy teams, it's really difficult when you can do the initial audit. When you are setting up a banner, you can take help of web development team or a marketing team, but they are changing things on a weekly basis, and privacy teams don't have a detection or a monitoring tool to give them that insight. And that's why someone changes a thing, does not tell privacy team, and that leads to these misconfiguration and such high violations. So we're going to discuss a little bit on the second half of the webinar on why are we seeing these non-compliance and what privacy teams can do from a detection perspective as well. Again, if there are any questions as I go through the webinar, feel free to add them in the Q&A box or chat box as well. So how did we gather this data? What did we do? So the first thing was to get the top 100 most visited website in US and Europe. We used traffic websites for that. That was our initial list. Again, the goal was not, or Privado's goal is never to, is to help companies. So it was never to like out any company. It's to just to make sure we have like a representative data. When we were running the US check, what we were doing, we were setting a GPC signal as a user would. And we were looking for two things. We would navigate automatically through Privado's consent scanning software. We would open the website from California, set the GPC signal, go to the website that we're scanning, and observe a few things. We will click a bunch of times, do a couple of refreshes, and our goal was to observe two things. One was cookies. Is the website storing any advertising third-party cookie, right? So if Google Ad Manager, double click, any of the advertisers which should not be setting those cookies are setting, we will call it out as a cookie violation. The second thing is network request. Now, network request is nothing but think of it as trackers, pixels, tags, right? Basically, the way our websites communicates externally, either they store the cookie, which then they send out, or second is they're like making these pixel calls, API calls to trackers, pixels, tags. That gets reflected in our network traffic log that the website generates, and we scan that. So the second thing we looked was, are there any third-party trackers or pixels being fired, right, before or after, even after giving the opt-out in US. So US straightforward look at cookies and pixel tracker calls and see if they're being fired. The second was Europe. Europe was a little more complex. We had multiple tests. The first test was we would, again, as a user, open it from a jurisdiction. Again, this is all done by our software automatically. The first thing they would do is take no action. So first test, no action. What happens? Are there any non-essential cookies being stored? Are there any advertising cookies being stored? What pixels are being fired, right? So these three things are what we observe. For Europe specifically, because advertising generally cannot be done without consent, we were also focused on advertising pixel calls as well. So that was one test. The second test was reject. So we would automatically simulate, figure out where the reject buttons are, even if they were inside. Our solution would do that and reject the banner saying, so the two main tests were no action and reject all. And then we would see if non-essential cookies are stored, create an issue, non-compliance issue. And second is if any advertising trackers, pixels, or tags are being fired, create an issue. So that was the methodology. It was completely run on our consent monitoring benchmarking solution that we have internally, and yeah, something that you can also utilize as our end customers. Finally, this is kind of a quick breakdown on what kind of website we scanned. So, media, of course, is high on both. We did definitely had a good breakdown on e-commerce, healthcare, some B2B, government as well. So pretty good representation of websites across sectors in both jurisdictions. Before we go into like specifics of what the fines were, uh, as a privacy professional, if you want to get ahead of regulators and get a free website audit, you can actually go to Privado. The link is in comment box. It's also on the slide here. Our goal again is to help privacy teams, which means this website audit is only offered to someone who works in the company. So, if someone is requesting a Privado.ai scan, if you work in Privado, we will give it to you. If you don't, then you do not get audit of someone else's website. That doesn't happen. You can request the report over email/LinkedIn, or if you want to do a one-on-one session and not get any data to your site, that is also possible. And finally, once either the report is sent or the meeting is done one-on-one, once that happens, the data is deleted from us, so we have no trail on what happened on your website. So yeah, if you are interested, if you want to get ahead of the regulatory side, feel free to send and yeah, I think my team members have reshared the link as well. Moving on, a couple of things we divided the website report is, one is US and Europe. So let's first dive into what US is doing. So first of all, if you looked at like, okay, what's this 76% of websites that are not compliant, how are they doing from an industry perspective? So average is 76%. You can see media is the highest, 79, and healthcare is slightly doing better at 63%. So yeah, we've seen, and of course the reason is there that they're under HIPAA. Also, they're generally more aware of privacy laws. There have been pixel breaches, so we see less issues there as well. The next main insight were, if you look at like what are the kind of violations that are happening in US, trackers. So first of all, whenever you read network request, think trackers or pixels being fired, and cookies being stored. So they're pretty balanced. So 75% are trackers fired, and almost 70% are also storing cookies. So it's kind of in the similar range. They're not doing better in either. When we go to Europe, you'll see it kind of flips. The main issue there seems to be trackers. So if you look at US websites, if you have put a banner, even after doing that, either your trackers are being fired or your cookies still are being stored. And these are advertising. I'm not talking about, hey, Google Analytics or Segment. It's like Google Ad Mob or, any of these marketing advertising vendors, Facebook ads, things like that. And we'll see what are the top popular ones as well. Next, if you look at what were the main reasons, so one is like how many websites were non-compliant, which were very high, but across the website, they were on an average about 69 compliance issues on a median basis. And the majority of them were trackers firing, right? So 54 on an average, if you look at across 100 of these websites, there were about 54 tracker calls that were happening. So 54 pixels were being fired, pixel calls were being made, and that's the biggest risk we see. And I also want to tie it back to the biggest breaches that have happened last year from a privacy perspective are not database breaches, they are pixel breach. Happened on healthcare websites as well. That's why FTC also fined. So these pixel firing happening, these 54 non-compliance are a big issue on websites right now and something you should monitor both from a consent perspective and also what data is going to these 54 pixel calls. On the third party cookie or the advertising cookie it was actually much less. There were only on an average about 9 advertising cookies that would get stored. So while that is still a risk, the main risk seems to be in US on the network or the pixel firing. We'll see that in Europe, things will change slightly differently. So Europe, again, like pretty representative, media number one. And then, after media, everything else does slightly better, healthcare, lifestyle as well. Uh, what really interested me was this. So when we were looking at US, the pixel fires and the cookie firing were happening equally, like 75-70, right? So almost similar websites had both issues. In Europe, because there's GDPR and cookies have been in conversation for a very long time, what we have observed is 72% have the pixel being fired and only 39% have cookies being firing, right? So Europe in general has done a much better job with cookies. I mean, there's still issues, but with pixel firing, they're not doing a great job as well. They're as bad as their US counterparts. There were websites where there were zero cookie issues, but still advertisers, pixels and tags and APIs were being fired, and that is still an issue. And again, I'm not saying Google Analytics was fired. I'm saying Google Ads was fired, things like that. Go ahead. Perfect. So next thing is non-compliant website. If we look at, again, the same set that we looked in US for, on the European counterpart, the number of issues were less, right? 23 versus 69. And if you look at the issue, like on an average, there's only one cookie across these 100 websites that would get stored, right? So the number of cookie issues were really less. The majority of issues tend to be on trackers firing, right? So again, like if you take a step back, we see on an average, both both have non-compliance issues. US and Europe are very similar. In US, it seems to be cookies are also being stored and pixels are also being fired. And the volume again is more skewed on pixels. In Europe, things are slightly different. The main issue seems to be pixels firing, and even in the volume of issues, pixels are really high. Cookies, they've done a better job at cookies than US. So that kind of adds up. That kind of makes sense. So depending on where you are joining in from, if you're from Europe, your main focus might end up being the network request risk or the pixel risk. And if you're from US, like pretty much both risks are there. But the volume or the quota of your pixels firing is much higher. Perfect. Next, we will move on to third-party benchmarking. So one of the key risks that websites have are around third-party data sharing. And the first thing for privacy teams is to figure out, hey, like it's very difficult to say how many pixels I have. Let's say you have that number. Let's say you have 5 pixels or 5 third parties. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it too much? There is no real answer to that. So we wanted to get you that data and say, okay, here's what the industry is. You can basically, we're not saying it's good or bad, but at least you can say this is what we do from an average perspective. Let's start from there. So first of all, if you look at US versus Europe and just focus on advertising, in US on an average, you will get 17 advertising third parties. In Europe, you'll get six. So that's a country level difference. We're much more aggressive in advertising in US versus Europe, or much more open to add more third parties, I would say. Um, and yeah, to answer your question, yes, we will share the PDF also after the presentation. And actually, the presentation is a very abridged version. If you download the report, it also has a lot more commentary. So yeah, we've just taken everything from there, but we will share the presentation as well. The second thing is, if you look at, so that's just advertising, right? So think Meta ads, Google ads, right? So US is almost 3x integrating more kind of third parties versus Europe. So if you are a global company, or if you're more US focused, your risk surface from where either consent issues can happen or data sharing can happen is almost 3 times. Second, if you look at total third parties, so this includes all kind of third parties: marketing, analytics, logging, developer, fraud detection. US has 31 and Europe has 21. So even here, while it's not 2x, 1.5x, even there, US is, I think, much more open in terms of adding more third parties on your website, right? Uh, the news for privacy team is having 31 third parties which can collect data as whatever data they want, where you have very little insight, is challenging. You have to manage that, and that's why a lot of issues are there. We see those. So yeah, that's a good data point. We look at, like, we also differentiated between advertising and marketing. So marketing, for example, for us could be something like a customer data platform, or or a notification platform like Braze. Those would be marketing. User analytics would be Segment, tools like that. Uh, so yeah, they were pretty neck to neck. I think the main difference we see is just in terms of how many more advertising third parties get integrated in US versus Europe. So yeah, if there's a question, and you go back and either you look at your current inventory or you use Privado to scan, and this number is like, hey, we have 51 third parties. So that's like a good signal for you to say, hey, we are definitely above benchmark vis-a-vis the top 100 websites. Also, one clarification, this is post-consent, which means we are actually doing accept all. In US anyways, it's opt-out, but still we're doing accept all. And in Europe, we explicitly doing accept all to make sure we're discovering all third parties. So there's no consent filtering happening here. Moving on, like if you see another interesting area, in terms of, like, if you look at just that double click on that advertising third parties, like, hey, what are the most common advertising third parties? So yeah, pretty much it's the same. US Google ads and Facebook ads are neck to neck, followed by Microsoft ads. I think these are the top three. Europe, it's also exactly the same. It's just Google ads penetration is much, much higher in Europe. Facebook is a little less. Microsoft is even less, right? So this is also like a good insight around, hey, what are the type of third parties that we see from an advertising perspective in between the two jurisdictions. I do want to call out, while there haven't been a lot of Google Ads reach, Metapixel has been known to cause a lot of issues on website. So think if you have a website where some sensitive data can go out, let's say a health website where you have an onboarding form or a payment form, or you're a bank and your team adds Facebook Pixel after login, a lot of sensitive data can automatically go to Facebook Ads Pixel. And that has been a reason for fines in US and Europe as well on pharmacy websites in both the cases, right? So driven by regulator in Europe, driven by FTC in US. So yeah, I think if I look at this graph, what worries me as a privacy person is that, yeah, most likely I have the Facebook pixel on my website, and I don't know currently like what data are they getting, right? So you need something to solve for that. We'll cover that in a moment. Second, I think this is the second biggest thing that, from my perspective, is a big risk for privacy team. 78% of websites use a tag manager. Let me take a pause. 78% of websites use a tag manager. Tag manager is almost like wild, wild west. Tag manager is a technology where you integrate it once, and then your marketing team can go on that platform, tagmanager.google.com, and say add another tag which is for Facebook pixel, TikTok pixel, Snapchat pixel, whatever third party they want to integrate, it doesn't even go through the software development lifecycle. It just can happen through that. So the tag manager has capability to add any additional third parties without any oversight. And because tag managers are essential for your website to even work, they are never blocked. They're most likely whitelisted in all CMPs, right? So they are whitelisted, so they will always fire, and they can fire anything based on whatever the marketing person do. So I know there was an argument in one case, like an intern did it, we didn't know about it. That is pretty much how tag manager is. Like a lot of people have access, they can turn on things, and it's not necessarily they will put the right consent setting in tag manager. And we see a lot of issues on website because the pixel was not directly deployed, so the CMP could never block it. They were being set by tag managers, Google Tag Manager specifically. So yeah, and this is another insight. You can see what are the most popular tag manager. Okay, more or less is 78%, 70% plus is Google Tag Manager, then Adobe, then Telium. It doesn't matter which tag manager you use. The risk with tag managers are they are mostly whitelisted from a CMP perspective. And if your team is not careful, again, you can do some bit of training. Unless you monitor what's happening, you will end up having misconfigurations in Tag Manager, which reflects back on your website. There have been so many times we've seen this issue again and again. Yeah. So as someone who's looked at data of these 100 websites or even talked to privacy professional, I would say this is like number one risk for privacy teams is the tag manager. It's really the is one technology which is like fully democratized to a lot of people on the marketing side, and they don't have the context and they need your help. Like if they make a mistake, you need to have detection in place to tell them, hey, fix this before a regulator gets to see this. Uh, Next, we're going to go into takeaways, but I do want to make sure if there are any questions, they are sent over. So I know there is a question. I'm going to take that up and then move ahead. So feel free to like drop more questions. I have a section towards the end as well. So the question really is, have we found that 69% of compliance websites due to human error? Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to answer that. Uh-huh. Okay, that's a great question. So, Chad, thanks for asking that question. So, the 69% or the 69 compliance risk, are they intentional or non-intentional? Or is it like, hey, human slips? Is it about training? Is it about privacy by design? And how does it match the overall effectiveness of a compliance program? So, here's what I've observed, Chad. The problem is it's not intentional. 99.99% is not intentional. The reason is because, for a simple reason, they are blocking 8 other scripts which will give them more revenue and targeting, but they missed 2 scripts. So if it was intentional, I would actually not block any script. I would just let all the scripts go. It's still have the banner, but I let all the scripts go. So they actually block, but miss some things. Why do they miss it? I kind of answered some of it in this slide, but I think there are few reasons they miss it. The number one reason is access to deploying of pixel scripts on the website is democratized. They're democratized because of platforms like tag managers, customer data platforms. Marketing teams may have integrated some tools which give them power, but they don't need to speak to anyone in the web dev side where they can switch on and switch off things. And that adds a lot of these pixels and scripts. That's number one problem. Number two problem is actually CMP misconfiguration, where the person who's configuring makes a mistake. That can definitely happen. The third one we've seen is the auto blocking, manual blocking confusion that always happens with CMP, and they're not able to automatically block. You're still not sure. That is another one. And finally, like the last one, kind of big one that I've seen happening kind of again and again is just the fact that like the person who's sometimes managing uh, the deployment of CMP is far from people who are deploying the scripts. So they are not talking amongst themselves, and one person does a change and the other one is not aware. So they're not updating. The answer, of course, you can train more people. Of course, it's about catching and initiatives should come to privacy team as well if someone decides to add a new pixel. But from a realistic operational perspective, what my suggestion is to have detection in place. Either you can use Privado. In Europe, they have a European Data Protection Board evidence collector tool. That is a little complex to set up for legal teams. That's the problem. But irrespective, you need detection in place. You need to scan your website. Once you put the CMP, you need to scan to see if the consent is working or not. And once you have that, then it will start to generate alerts for other teams saying, hey, marketing team, these are all the problems in GTM, fix it. As that happens, that actually trains the marketing team more because they know if they make a mistake, it gets caught. So next time they remember, okay, maybe before I do that, I should just run a scan in Privado to make sure there's nothing wrong. Once that starts to happen, that brings up that training, cultural change, data protection by design, default, and actually kind of strengthens your compliance training program. But I think like there is need of detection and continuous monitoring. Once you have that, then your training actually is much more significant. We've seen that across security. We've seen that in privacy as well. So, but Chad, really great question. Thanks for asking that. If there are any more questions, feel free to put in the Q&A section. I have another section in the end as well, so I'll take those, but I'll keep looking at my Q&A section as I go along. Perfect. So key takeaways, what can we do? What can you do today for next year and make sure you're not the 74%. So personally, I've been given this feedback on LinkedIn that this number will always be high. My actual theory is this number next year when we run the report will be lower than what it is today. Yeah, that's my thinking because what my sense is like actually people are putting so much energy in making their website compliant. It's a lack of tooling and detection that is a problem. So we'll see where it goes. Like we definitely want that to happen, and yeah, we'll see. Question is, why would I want to scan my site continuously versus periodic checks? I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can scan, if you scan it like, I would say like scan it at least weekly. That's what our recommendation is. Okay, and once you do that, then you are pretty good. The advantage of scanning continuously is like, that is kind of proactive scanning, wherein you don't wait for your website to be deployed, you just scan it beforehand. And yeah, so think of like shifting left in security, they do it like they kind of shift left, find things early so they don't have to catch people to fix later. So yeah, continuous scanning helps you to prevent issues from going live. And but I would say like start periodic, start weekly, start a monthly scan. If you're weekly in your weekly scan, everything is not generating an issue, that's better. And thanks for adding that, Ganesh. I think you mentioned a 2021 study which was 90%, so we've done better, and that was top 1,000. So yeah, hopefully, my guess is the same. The regulators, anyways, are going to continue to do cookie sweeps. We've seen that in Europe. We've seen that in US as well a little bit. So my guess is like, yeah, the privacy teams who are pushing for this initiative, they will actually help this number to get better. It's more of a, in my opinion, more of a detection problem as much as intent problem. Perfect. So yeah, some key takeaways. What can privacy teams do? Number one, websites are the source of increasing privacy risk. I like to call it as the enforcement surface area, the easiest enforcement surface area, which your users can see and complain to a regulator, which a regulator can scan, which an activist can scan and put a lawsuit, right? All three. So website, I think, is the easiest. App is more difficult. Connected TV is most difficult, but at least website is like super difficult, or sorry, super easy, and is the enforcement from an enforcement surface area perspective number one target. Second, putting a CMP alone does not ensure compliance. A, the CMP itself could not be working because of all the things we discussed, tag manager, scripts issues. B, even after consent, even if I say accept, I might still be leaking data to these pixels because of the way they are set up. They're automatically collecting data. So you still need more things. Monitoring solutions, detection solutions are needed, We have a solution for that. You can also, if you are techie, you can try to set up the European Data Protection Board tool. If you're even if you have questions for that, we have a Slack community where are like someone. There are a lot of technical people who might answer those questions for you. But detection is important. Doing that is important. Getting ahead is important. Um, And then just linking to that, a question is from Stefan, which is how do you scan website where there is a consent banner, handling accept, reject, custom? Great question. Yeah. So even in the study, that's what we found in Europe. Basically, all of these websites had banner. The banner wasn't working. So what we do from a monitoring perspective is the website gets opened from a geography. Let's say France, right? That's where the orange find happened. What we do is we'll simulate the website from France, and the first thing we do is take no action and see what happens. Are there any cookies firing? Are there any trackers firing? Next, our technology automatically identifies all the button. Is there an accept button? Is there a reject button? Is there a configuration button? And we click each one of them individually. So we will click reject all, we will click custom, and then again reject all. And then we're testing for the same two things. And from there, we are creating these non-compliance alerts. That's how this report got built as well. If you have, Stefan, more question, feel free to drop, like either you can connect with me on LinkedIn or send a message to the Privado team and they will be able to answer. So there's a question by Todd. Do tools like Qualys work in identifying the privacy issues? So Todd, unfortunately, no. There are security scanning tools, but they are fully focused on the security buyer. They are not trying to solve for the privacy user like you. For you, you have to use the privacy tools who are trying to solve your problem. Again, you can use Privado to point at it. There is a European Data Protection Board tool you can point at it, but you need to monitor if your consent is working or not. And the way to do that is to act like a user, like we do. Simulate the website, act like a user, click a bunch of buttons around your consent and see what happens. That's the right way to do it. And that's how we've orchestrated Privado. So, but yeah, Qualys won't do it. Security tools, they have other things to prioritize and privacy is not one of them. If there would be a security tool that you can reuse, I would have recommended already for sure. And the last question, and then I'm going to move to the next slide, is what role do CMPs have in ensuring data controllers are lawful? For instance, when a client requests configuration, which is agree and manage, how do you discuss the cookie banner task force guidance? Okay, great question. So I think from a basic perspective, CMPs are a platform, right? Think of CMPs as, uh, like they've given you the technology. Now you decide, like everyone says the same. We are not going to interpret if Google Analytics is essential, non-essential. They can categorize it, but you can always change the categorization. It's up to the privacy team to make the representation or make those decisions. So CMP at the end of the day are like tools that allow you to set consent. How you set consent is on you, and they are not monitoring in if it's right or wrong. Maybe as time goes, they can give you insights like, hey, if you do this, this is, based on this ABC law, wrong. But yeah, it's ultimately for the company to do. Secondly, we have the same approach. When we run these tests, we create issues on the strictest definition of the law, but we do allow our customers to like override and say, yeah, this is not a problem, our interpretation is whatever. So I think at the end of the day, privacy technology tools like a consent management platform or our consent monitoring solution, we can give you the information, but at the end of the day, when the legal experts are always in the company, and sometimes it's a risk decision that they take. So depending on what their interpretation is or what their risk appetite is. So that would be my answer, Chad. Um, all right, keep the questions coming. Thank you for asking all these wonderful questions. Uh, and jumping on to the next thing, what are the best things you can do for website governance, right? What can you do to improve the state of website privacy from 74%, hopefully less than half, even better? These are best practices, of course, depending on the company. There might be other strategies as well. I think configuring consent banners centrally has, at least I've heard, has been a better strategy because you can manage, and there are less dependency between one CMP solution versus the other. It could be, one CMP doesn't work, but that's definitely, centralizing has definitely been better. Uh, Maintaining actually an up-to-date third-party catalog for website, like what are the trackers that are firing, what are the pixels that are firing is important. I know not all, very few CMPs give you that information, so that's also a problem. They only give you the cookie information. But having that visibility on what are the third parties, what are firing pre-consent, post-consent is super important. I think the third one comes up from the website really, really strongly. Testing your consent banners is very, very important regularly. So having a detection tool like Privado or whichever one you want to use, but making sure you're testing your website every week automatically is super important. You can also be like a techie, or someone can go and click inspect and try to find it. I feel that's such a like something that will not scale for most companies. You want like something to run in the background and generate alerts and tell you, hey, your website in France is not working, or your banner actually disappeared. We've also seen those alerts. The next, from a governance perspective, well, one is tracking data flows. I think while we focus a lot on consent in this report, something we would change in the next one as well, a lot of risks are around data sharing. So if you have a metapixel, which 75% of websites have, or in both jurisdictions, they can actually automatically collect a lot of data: page name, screen name, what data was entered in a form. And if that Pixel is deployed on an app which is collecting health information to suggest me a drug, to suggest me a weight loss drug, then all that data goes to Metapixel or TikTok Pixel or Snapchat Pixel. That's an issue. So you need to figure that out. And finally, implementing guardrails. I think that's super important for website. Having those detection capability. You can also utilize our code scanning solution for that to shift left. I think that is critical too. And a bit about Privado in terms of how you can use the Privado solution itself. So we have a website scanning solution where you can point your domain, select a geography, and based on the geography, we will run test. It's all dynamic. We don't need anything except for the domain. What we would do is we would simulate the website as a user would. And if it's Europe, uh, we will do few tests. No action. What happens if a user takes no action on banner? What happens if a user does reject all, configure and reject? In US, CPRA do not sell or share, right? Once that test happens, you will see a list of privacy issues on what all cookies get fired or pixels get fired in Europe, US. You will also get a full catalog of all pixels and cookies, all third parties actually. And then also you can figure out what data flows are happening. So yeah, if nothing, do feel free to request a free audit of your website. And yeah, if you use our solution, then of course you'll have it on a continuous basis. Second most important thing, again, that I keep seeing is will become a bigger risk as well, is mapping these data flows with doing the product scanning. So you can scan the website outside in, which is kind of the user experience, dynamic experience, but you can also look at the website code. So which is the engineer's logic on what data goes where. We can scan that from our privacy code scanning solution, track what data you collect, where you send externally, identify any sensitive data sharing, and then actually help you fix that as well. So my recommendation to most of the companies is at least start what your regulators can see, activists can see, start your scan from outside in, be reactive, see the issues, and then second, go become proactive, start scanning code so you prevent things from going live. Finally, again, a quick call out. Our goal at Privado is to get you ahead of regulators, activists, and actually help privacy teams achieve better outcomes, so have less issues on their website. This website scan audit report will only be shared to people working in the company they're requesting the scan for. If you're from a law firm, if you can get authorization from someone official in the company that you are trying to get the report on, we will share. But we've made it in a way that we only share it with privacy teams, and the data gets deleted later. You can request it on email, LinkedIn, or if you don't want a paper trail, if you want a one-on-one viewing session, we can do that as well. With that, I'm going to move to Q&A. Thanks for attending the webinar so far. We have 15 minutes. I would love to answer any questions that you have in terms of tag managers, pixels, non-compliance, the technology, the European Data Protection Board. We've spent a lot of time in analyzing websites, and yeah, we see all these patterns. So happy to take up any question. I know there was one question around tag manager specifically, which was like, so the question really was, can Privado also help us discover what data goes from tag managers? So yeah, so think about tag managers. Tag managers are doing two things. One is client side third parties. So client means your website, basically where you will add a tag or a pixel and it will get added to your website. The second thing is called server side sharing, wherein from the tag manager itself, data goes out to advertisers and it never gets shown on the website. The more regulators are scanning, the more marketing teams sometimes are moving from client side sharing to server side sharing. You will hear this term a lot. Whenever you hear client side, it means on your website. Whenever you see server, it means like backend, you never see it. So yeah, actually Privado also has a Google Tag Manager integration where we will also discover any tag which is wrongly misconfigured and the data that goes from your tag manager to external third parties. My team member also added a comment for our free Slack community where you can discuss a lot of these issues around privacy engineering as well. So feel free to ask those questions there also. Uh, Perfect. So that was the last question I have. So yeah, I'll hang out around for a few more minutes. If there are any more questions, feel free to add them on the chat, either on the chat box or on the Q&A section. I see one more question coming up. Okay, so the question really is, what are the top issues we see in when we say these advertising pixels are being fired? Okay, so I mean, from my perspective, at least what we saw in the report and otherwise as well, I think two issues we see. One is tag manager kind of issues, which is tag manager being responsible. And then the second thing we see is first party script. So sometimes what happens is you have a script by the website itself, right? So let's take hypothetical. Privado creates a script called cdn.privado.js, blah, blah, blah. And then in that script, I add all the advertising script. Why? Because that helps page load time. What happens is I will not block, because that script will have some essential scripts and some marketing script. So I will not block that script and the other scripts will not get blocked. And then you are in a deadlock and someone made a bad design choice there. So that is another one we see. Chad has a question on for Web3 wallets, verified credentials for consent. We do have more consent assurance use cases. Chad, if you're interested, feel free to reach out to our team and we'll be able to answer those as well. We also are able to do it at a verified at a code level. Thank you for that question. And yeah, let's stick for 2 more minutes. Again, if anyone has any more questions, happy to take that. But thanks everyone thanks everyone for joining in. We will be sharing this webinar recording separately. We will also be sharing the slides. There is the State of Website Privacy Report available as well for anyone to download, where you can see the same insights. The Privado team had done a great job in analyzing and then putting up the benchmark that privacy teams seek, but they're not able to get. Okay, there's one last. My team has put that as well. With that, thank you everyone. Have a great rest of the day or evening, and we'll see you soon.